So I want to talk about our relationship with ourselves. Or maybe I should say your relationship with you. Of course, all the same stuff applies to me. And I want us to take a look at this little handout we gave you. It's quite simple, but we're going to refer back to it repeatedly. The four establishments of mindfulness at the top, and I know many of you probably have know about this. Maybe you've studied it. Maybe you've attended retreats where this is the whole topic. I don't know, but for others, you may never have heard about this before. And regardless of any of that, we're going to be using this framework in a slightly different way, at least the way I'm going to talk about it tonight, than what is done classically. You can see the Pali word there next to that title, the Four Establishments of Mindfulness. It's Satipatthana. Sati, S-A-T-I, means mindfulness. And patthana is like the foundation, or so sometimes it's translated as the foundations of mindfulness. And there are four that the Buddha laid out. This is one of the core teachings that he gave, fundamental to the practice and the development of the mind. And they are the contemplation of the body, which in Pali is kaya nupassana. And kaya means body, and nupassana is the contemplation part. And contemplation of feeling is Vedana, so Vedana nupassana. And the contemplation of mind is Chitta nupassana. And contemplation of Dhamma nupassana. Obviously, Dhamma isn't translated here. Sometimes it's translated as principles, or it just feels like there isn't any single word in English that captures what this means. So we prefer to not translate it and dig into what is the Dhamma really. So when we think about who do we think we are, we can look at it from so many different layers. And so I'm going to reflect on like how we relate to our body, our feelings, our mind, and the Dhamma, the truth of the way things are, the way things work, principles of Dhamma. And whatever I say, it's really intended for your reflection. So, really letting it sink in and seeing how you might find it to be useful. None of this is intended as something you need to pick up and believe in. But it might give you a way of looking at your own experience as an individual that might help in certain ways open some things up, maybe to see that you're not who you thought you were. We'll see. So contemplation of the body, or your relationship to the body, and actually for each of these there's really two levels, if you will, of reflection. And one of them is the one layer is this conventional reality, like the way we see ourselves living in this world, on this planet Earth, in these particular bodies, with our specific social and cultural conditioning, our personalities, and all of the conditioning that has gone into creating our personalities, how we handle things, what our habits are, all the ways in which we get by in the world and have learned to cope. Basically whatever is in this package of me. on a conventional level, which is actually the surface, which is mostly what we think, who we think we are. And I want to open your mind to, and you may already be there or have thought about this a lot, is that there's something much bigger or beyond that individual personality self. And when we think about how we relate and what the tangles are for us in this identity, then looking at it from that larger scope can really help us untangle. So contemplating the body and what is the body, and of course, on a conventional level, and I'll call that first level, the level of us operating in the world, the conventional level, and then we might call the other level ultimate reality, something like that. You know, we may think of it as, depending on the context, people might use words like the greater self or there are all kinds of things, and some of them would match what the Buddha talked about and the way the Buddha talked about it, and some of them don't. But it's all generally the same idea. What's beyond this conventional identity? Okay, so conventionally, of course, you've been living with this body a while. You have a pretty good idea of how it works, and whatever your relationship to it is, you may like it, you may not like it, you may like some things about it. Certainly there are experiences with the body that none of us like. And the body has, its ever-changing levels of healthiness and capability and so on. And you can notice that these things constantly change. And that's one of the main Dhamma reflections that the Buddha really wanted us to get. So in this contemplation of body, in the texts, there are many different approaches. And one of them was offered to you this morning by Ayya Santussikā, really looking at the body as elements, the four basic elements that we find in everything on the planet. And that this is also made up of those four basic elements. Oh, you had five. You used, I'm sorry, five elements. We could also go into 6 elements, but she didn't. Thanks. So 5 elements, space being the 5th one. So when we think about the body, we can also consider that it's this collection of parts. So I'm not sure if I'll do this, but I might do a guided meditation with you sometime this week on the parts of the body. It's another way of looking at the body. And what the Buddha was trying to encourage is that we would start to notice that the body changes constantly. Some part is working not so well from time to time, or as we get older, there's more of that going on. And, we've all watched aging, whether it's our own or someone else's, and we see what happens to the body over time. So the Buddha wasn't trying to get us to dislike or discount the body. In fact, the body is considered to be an important, very important instrument, you might say, that we use to really understand Dhamma, really understand nature. Because we can learn everything. The Buddha said we could learn everything we need to know to awaken in this body. That's pretty cool. So there are many opportunities in our culture to work with how we feel about the body or how we relate to our body on a conventional level. discussions of body image, or, there's all kinds of medical care to work with its problems and so on. And of course, our focus is much more on seeing the body in what we would say is more realistic terms than an identity. But in order to do that, first we have to, I think, kind of own up to the fact that we're pretty attached to this thing. And in general, when something goes wrong with it, it feels upsetting. And I remember once, a long time ago, before I became a nun, I think you remember Ayya Santussikā told you kind of how I got into this with my son becoming a monk. And so that got me going to monasteries. And I remember going to the monastery in Northern California, Ayya Buddhist monastery. If you ever want to visit a fairly large monastery where there are monks, that's a great one to go visit. And the abbot there, Ajahn Pasanno, was talking about something that just recently happened. One of the neighbors adjacent to the monastery, who had become really a strong community member at the monastery after the monastery got started. Her name was Mary. And he was announcing to the community that Mary she had been acting in a local play, and she couldn't finish the run of the play because she was feeling so bad. And she went to the doctor, and they thought there were some serious problems, and they did a kind of emergency surgery, and they found out that she was just full of cancer. And they said at that time there wasn't anything they could do. This was quite a long time ago. A lot more could be done these days, I think. But in any case, Ajahn Pasanno went to visit her, and she said to him, I know that I'm going to die soon, and I might not even be able to go home before that happens. But I just want to say how happy how grateful I am, and how happy I am to have met the Dhamma. And she was just feeling joy, feeling peace. And Ajahn Pasanno said, he told her, I'm not worried about you, Mary. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm probably in my early 40s at that point, and I'm thinking, that's what I want. If I get that kind of news, that's how I want to be able to be with it. And what makes that possible? Well, one part is reflecting on the aging and deterioration of the body and the fact that it's going to die. So a number of the reflections in that part of body contemplation in the foundation of mindfulness is about death, and it's about the body deteriorating and how we can observe that, and from that reflection realize that there's no way that this body is actually me. And that's something to really consider. And taking care of it is important, and making good use of it is important. And then, gradually, gently, reflecting on its nature. And that, of course, the understanding of what happens. Who am I? And what am I if I'm not the body? And then what happens to that when the body is finished? And why would someone be so grateful and feeling at peace with that transition? And so this is what we want to really look at. And so this all relates to, how do I relate to this body? right? Can I have compassion for it? Can I see it and what it's going through in the way that we talked about this morning when we were answering questions? You know, like I'm in the hut and my body is out there in the storm doing its thing, you know, whether it's a health thing or it's just an aging thing, you know, and I can be present with it without, or can we be present with it? And of course, a lot of feelings will come up as we change or as the other people in our life go through these things. But we can also learn how to be present with that. You know, so it's the observing of this body and its natural qualities. And then, you know, what I thought about when I heard this story of Mary, and I thought, okay, I mean, I'm going to have to do a lot of work because I get upset over all kinds of small things. And I want to be ready. So let me practice on the small things. And I can tell you after 30 years, and it doesn't take 30 years, it just is a matter of how the process goes for each of us in really being able to face reality and embrace reality and recognize the peace and joy and relief that comes from embracing reality and seeing it for what it is. So the practice really does work. And it's also helpful because then we can be a stable, my mind wants to say force, but that's not quite right. A stable support for the people around us when they're going through the same kinds of things. And about 7 or 8 years ago now, I was with my mother as she was dying. And even though I was a nun, I was fortunate I was able to look after her for about the last 7 years of her life. And most of that time, she didn't need that much looking after. She was pretty independent, self-sufficient. But towards the end, she really needed help. And in the last 3 months, and I didn't know how long it would be, but I really needed to stay with her all the time. She had gotten to the point where she couldn't safely, you know, walk to the bathroom, or there was all kinds of things she needed help with. And being with her through that whole process, with the practice on board, with being able to practice this exact teaching, really gave me what I needed in order to be able to be with her, fully love her, fully accept what's happening with her body and what's inevitable for all of us, and to be able to support her like a kind of a midwife on the other end of things. And there's a reflection in this foundation of mindfulness where when you reflect on any kind of death, like maybe when you're walking, you might see a body of a squirrel or a bird, or, you know, in nature, it's around us all the time. And you can use that as an opportunity to really observe and notice, you know, this is the natural process. This body is kind of brought together by all these elements, you know, that contribution from mother and father, and then it develops and it grows and it changes and it ages, and then it's going to pass away. And there's all this happens in nature, and we can use that reflection of, now this has happened to this bird. Okay, let me take that in and appreciate that this is the natural way of things. Appreciate that everything has to return back to its origin. And then the question is, what is really you if it's not that body? What's the origin of that? And we're getting to that. And it's also not something I can really tell you or teach you. You've got to find that. This is what we discover ourselves, and then we know it. So one of the reflections in this contemplation of the body is to see the body of another and know that this body that I think of as me or mine is going to be like that at some point. That was extremely powerful with my mother and all losing weight and everything. And I could see, because our bodies were very similar. I look a lot like her. And I could be present with the fact that that body there and this body here are the same. Just like that, those lines in the elements, the earth element in this body is the same as the earth element in the world. No difference. And eventually, this earth element in the body will go back to the earth element in the world, and so on. So a lot of different feelings can come up when we think like this, right? And fortunately, we have the contemplation of feeling to help us. So when we're relating, you can think about how you relate to feeling. And in the classic sense, in this establishment of mindfulness, feeling is considered to be pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or feeling that's really not pleasant or painful. And we can all relate to, we all know what it feels like to have pleasant feeling. Whether it's a feeling in the body or it's an emotional feeling, a mental feeling of joy or happiness or love, But then we can also recognize that, and we know what painful feeling is like. And if neither of those are happening, like now I'm thinking about my right knee, it's neither painful nor pleasant. It's just neutral. Most of the time we just ignore that. But when I think about this establishment of mindfulness, even though it's not the classical way that the Buddha taught it, I think about emotions, those feelings, those emotions that arise in us. Sadness, grief, anger, fear, joy, happiness, tranquility, all of these beautiful feelings and challenging feelings. And to see that when we contemplate them, it's like the process we were talking about earlier today. How can we contemplate them without fully taking them on board as this is me? Because that's the way we talk. I'm angry, or I'm afraid, right? We have this very strong identification, just like we do with the body. With the body, we look in the mirror, that's my face. If something happens to my face, it's very upsetting, right? It's the same with feelings. That's my feeling, and I'm kind of like awash in it, maybe. And then, as we said earlier, with practice, it doesn't have to be that way. We can observe it here as an object to ourselves in the same way I can observe my body and what's happening to it, or the body of someone else and what's happening to it. And, we want to observe the things that we like and the things that we don't like equally. There are a lot of feelings that we have with the body, or there's a lot of things that happen with the body that we like. And there are a lot of feelings that we like. And it's good to observe those also as this isn't myself. This isn't really me. This is going to come and go really fast. It doesn't stay. And that's probably the most, one of the very significant reflections when we start talking about the contemplation of Dhamma. When we look at our our feelings, our body, our mind, its impermanence. So when we're working with feeling, on a conventional level, we've got a lot of good tools. We can do things to help calm ourselves down. We can do things to help bring up energy. We can do things to kind of process through what's going on, and use them. Use those great tools from psychology and other disciplines that help bring more stability and more understanding of your own kind of mental makeup that creates these feelings. And in addition, we can use the Dhamma practice, like we were talking about, to really be present with what we feel, to be able to observe its whole cycle. The first time I really did this, it was with a very, very strong sexual desire. I had been in a very important relationship, very important to me, and when it ended, I was devastated. And of course, this is before I ever met up with the Dhamma, and of course, even when you're a Dhamma practitioner, this happens, and then it's fortunate if we have tools to work with it. So one of the things that I had done, I think, in the past, when something like that would happen, find another person. That kind of rebound effect. It feels better to be with someone than to not be with someone. And in this particular case, I just knew I didn't want to do that. I kind of already had a pretty good idea of kind of how that would work out for me. And I also was really trying to, grapple with, what do I want in my life in terms of relationship or lifestyle. And so I decided I don't want to date anybody. I don't want to, do anything. And then this incredible wave of sexual desire came in like a tidal wave. And you work with people for years, and then suddenly they start looking attractive. You're in trouble. It was like that. And so I don't know what gave me this idea. I was already starting to explore spiritual practice for sure by then, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to do anything to gratify this incredibly intense desire and the feelings that come with it. And I can remember just observing the feelings and staying present with them and watching how it felt. And I'll tell you, I think it took like 3 or 4 days for this tidal wave of sexual desire to subside. And it did, and it really looks like this bell curve thing, It's just, and it was really interesting because then I started to track, like how I was feeling about this, and then another wave would come. It would be about the same, maybe a 3 or 4 day thing, and I would just wait it out, watch it. But then the second time it happened is kind of like what Ayya Santussikā said this morning. Second time I was present with it and observing it come and go. It didn't have as much power. It was so much, because I knew I could go through this. I knew I could wait it out. It would change. Because it's deeply uncomfortable. I mean, we really glorify those feelings in the world, and they certainly have their purpose. I mean, keeping the species going is part of the strong conditioning we all have. But there are also times when it really can get us into trouble. And so to be able to decide, when do I want to do something about this, and when don't I, and that I don't have to. that was a pretty cool realization for me. So maybe about a year or so later, I was taking my first trip to Thailand to visit my son, who had gone off to Thailand and become a monk. And I was really interested in finding out what he was up to. And the first thing I noticed coming into the monastery was a cremation site. So this is where people from the village would bring their deceased family members, and they would burn the body right there in the middle of the monastery as a practice. And, you know, it's really it's a culture shock. You know, it's a whole different world. And to start to learn from the monks, like what the philosophy is, what the practices are. And there was this monk who had been a monk for about 10 years or so. I still know him. We're, friends. I told him about this experience I had with the sexual desire, and he said, oh, that's what renunciation is. It's like you decide you're not going to follow a pattern or an urge or a pressure that you feel to do something. You decide you're not going to do it the way you usually do it. And then you give yourself a time limit, like you're going to resist this thing for a week or whatever you're going to say. And then you do it. You resist and you observe the feelings while that's going. All the feelings, the pressure that comes up that wants you to like respond the same way you always respond. And of course, it's really helpful to be like for me, I felt like responding to this was going to be harmful to me in the end. It's not what I wanted to do. And if we can see, patterns that we feel like, okay, this has me in a tangle. Can I use this process? Can I really, avoid? Another one that was quite potent for me was when I decided to stop giving unsolicited advice. Can I get through the next 2 hours with so-and-so without giving unsolicited advice? Oh, man, talking about, yeah. And then when I kind of made the determination I was going to stop doing that, I said, I'm going to stop doing that for everyone except my children. And my daughter was, why me? I said, but don't I have a responsibility? She's like, no. So you can see it's really applicable for so many things. When I think of the word renunciation, I don't think about deprivation at all. I think about a tool that really helps me take control of myself, of my life, to help me develop and grow and be a person that I really want to be, not someone who's just responding to the patterns that were basically laid on all of us. We were taught from the beginning of this life certain ways, whether it's just by seeing other people or however the conditioning happens. And we can choose something else. And we can choose to untangle the compulsions around feeling. And then we can turn to the mind, contemplation of mind. And of course, this is very tightly connected. The things that we think about really shape our future. And the way we think about things and really fuel those emotions and really lead us to all kinds of different actions. So when we start to observe our thoughts in this way, and this is what you're doing this week, you're present here. You can be present here with your body, present here with your feelings, and present with your thoughts. And when we make it simpler, like this retreat experience, and you don't have to be so engaged, because usually in daily life things go by pretty fast. We're reacting much more quickly. Here we can slow it down. And we can really be present with our urge to say things or the way we're thinking. And we can start to get more creative about it. okay, when I think about this interaction I had with so-and-so, because a lot of our thoughts are from the past, or something we did, or something someone else said, then how can I bring that up right now and really be present with the feelings that evokes, and then the way to work with the feelings is to not think about the content. I think I might have mentioned this earlier. It's like, instead of, all you need to think about is the triggering little bit, like when so-and-so said X, then this is how I felt. And, whatever it is, embarrassed, angry, defensive, insecure, whatever it is, you just have that phrase of what happened, and then you start to really be present with those feelings. And what's interesting about doing that again and again is we really start to understand, what the core kind of misunderstanding we have about life, about the world, about the Dhamma, that causes us so much pain. And when I was digging into this, it was even before I got into the Dhamma. I used a book called Undefended Love. I was actually one of the authors of this particular book, which you probably never heard of, was a therapist who was working near where I was living, and I went to see her, and she actually helped me do this process. This is long before becoming a nun. She helped me do this process of being present with my feelings in this way, without being entangled in them and without escaping from them. So she was able to sit there, and I was kind of narrating what's going on inside. And she would say, and she would know when I went back into my head and started thinking about it, and she'd say, okay, come back to the feeling and be present with it. And I thought I was a person with a lot of problems. And then as I started to do this and unravel them, I found out there was really only one problem. It all kind of kept coming back to the same thing. And in my case, it was, am I good enough? And the same person and her co-author had a retreat once, and I went to it, and I don't remember how they set it up, but they got people thinking about this, and they got people to locate that kernel of doubt or misunderstanding or a belief about ourselves. And each person in the room spoke what that was. And I was just like, yeah, oh my, everybody's got this. At least in this culture. I don't know about everywhere, but it's kind of like there's some basic thing that you might discover if you do this work. And then you might see how you can tenderly hold that, and that it isn't true. It's not who you are. Someone who's not good enough or better than other people or not as good as other people or whatever it is our beliefs are. We can examine them. We can really be with our thoughts. And we can listen to them without judging them. This is part of the thing, not well, I don't want to have that thought. But then, okay, just that's what's there. So is this true? Is this really me? And really observing in this way, and the feelings that come along with it, being present with it, not letting us, what do I want to say? Trying not to make those movements of escape from being present with our mind, with our feelings. And these exercises, if you will, or this practice, really comes to start to pull away the layers of who we thought we were. well, I'm this person who has this anxiety issue, or I'm a perfectionist, or I have this issue or that thing. And yeah, those things may be manifesting, but that's not really who you are. That's just the causes or the conditions that these conditions are conditional. They're based on other conditions. And when we can start to understand and reflect, through our reflection, not through trying to figure it out. We've been trying to figure it out already forever. But through being present with our experience and opening up to the insight that can arise about who we really are. And we want to do all of these things with an intention of kindness and gentleness and letting go. Letting go of our beliefs and our opinions and our views. Letting go of our past. Our everybody's got things that we regret. Letting go of it. Learning from it and letting go of it. Letting go of our worries about the future. And I know this is really hard because I'm living in a human body. I have people in my life that I love. I have, frankly, a country that I feel like is going quickly down the drain. Sorry if that's not how you see it. But, you know, we can take a step back. We can really, really observe it. And then when we come to a point, like when that sexual desire subsided and I could think clearly and I could make decisions about whether I want to spend time with this person or that person, or I could, you know, stop giving unsolicited advice and my relationships got better and I could see, I could be more, I could have more respect for these people and more like look at why I thought I knew more than they did, or where I was coming from. I was kind of a know-it-all. I hope that's mostly gone, but it's like, you know, just really facing this stuff that it's not really us. It's conditioned. It's conditioned, and we don't have to continue to put up with it, if you will. We can move in a different direction. And that direction is Dhamma. So this contemplation of Dhamma, which Ayya Santussikā is going to talk about that whole sequence at the bottom in more depth tomorrow night. At least that's the plan, I believe. And you never know what she might do. I really respect that. but to consider like what, you know, when we think about Dhamma, when we're looking at what we can actually observe and learn about everything in this world being impermanent and falling apart, and that, you know, when that intuition arises, it's not just a thought in the mind. It comes with incredible relief. It's like, wow, I was trying so hard to hold things in place, but actually they're meant to fall apart. So, again, a relationship ending. It was actually the next relationship. When that ended, which was a great relationship, I could talk to this person about anything. But he didn't want to be in it anymore. And I called my son the monk, and I said, and he said, yeah, but it's natural for things to end. And he said, so, you know, you got to look at the way the two of you are spending your time. You know, like I was doing a lot of meditation practice. He was doing a lot of TV watching, you know. He said, you're kind of going different directions here, you know. It's like natural. We're still friends. He still tells me I'm the person he trusts more than anyone else in the world. But it was so much better for me, really, to be able to be free to become a nun. And he's been doing great things with his life, too. Things end. You know? And all of these tools, all of this reflection, all of this development that we make, it softens these changes tremendously. It helps ease the suffering because we don't cling so much. The tangles are in the clinging. And when we can see that we're clinging, we know we're clinging because it hurts. And we can start to process and observe and gradually let go more and more. And the really interesting thing is that when we let go more and more, instead of feeling less secure, we're more secure. We're stable. We're happy. And we're available to the people in our world, in our life, and to the conditions in our world. We can make that shift to seeing the earth as it is and having some idea of what to do. Another thing my friend here will talk much more about, I think, later. So I think that might be enough for right now. Maybe a little too much, I don't know. But we're going to give you plenty of chance to talk to us about how you're doing and what you're thinking or feeling, and we can look at your specific examples if you like. No pressure. We want you to really take good care of yourself. If there's something in what you're hearing or what you're experiencing that's upsetting, you're very welcome. And we'll have plenty of opportunities to talk to us, especially in the groups. And also you can... I'm about to say something that I'm not sure is true, so I got to be careful. I'm sure you can reach out to the managers, and there are people who can really support you, including us. So I think I'll stop right there. I really wish you a good night and the opportunities to find some calm and peace and come to it with love and compassion and kindness. Yeah, thank you.